All right, hello and welcome to another Coffee with Quarto. Well, I'm not drinking all these coffee in a single sitting. This is, of course, another day, another Quarto update. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some changes that I just pushed to the Quarto neovim plugin and also the Quarto neovim Kickstarter configuration. So both go hand in hand and you can make use of all the latest features. So the first thing you notice is that when you now open a quarto document with the latest version of everything involved here, we actually get the file type quarto. This file type has been in neovim since a couple of minor versions, but we haven't used it before because, well, the other plugins are not there for quarto yet. So I was just resolving the quarto file type to the markdown file type. And this made things a lot simpler. But now I think the quarto file type has been around for long enough that we can actually make use of it. Quarto documents now officially have the quarto file type. This means that we have to explicitly map the quarto file type to use the markdown tree-sitter highlighting. But this is happening now automatically in the tree-sitter plugin, the neovim tree-sitter plugin. All right. Notice how we have the quarto neovim plugin, but there's also the quarto vim plugin, which is essentially a wrapper or requires the vim pandoc syntax plugin, and then gives us some additional syntax highlighting. Now, quarto neovim itself does not come with any additional syntax highlighting. It just uses the markdown tree-sitter highlighting. So this keeps it quite lightweight. But if you want more syntax highlighting, like I'll show you in a second, we can, of course, use both of these together. And this is what the latest update in the quarto neovim Kickstarter configuration does. I will show you how this looks like in a second. Actually, let's just open a new terminal here. Open neovim. I'm lazy, I have an alias for this. I just type V and now I type S for settings. Let's go to the quarto plugin folder. And here's what changed. We are still using the auto neovim extension for code completion, but we are also now requiring the quarto vim extension when the file type is quarto, and we are using the vim pandoc syntax highlighting. Now this does need to have additional vim syntax highlighting enabled for the markdown tree-sitter parser in the tree-sitter Lua file. So in here, in the tree-sitter file, this here is enabled. And then when we configure everything for quarto, we set a couple of more options here. For example, now I decided to actually set the conceal level to 1, which means concealing is the act of there's some text, and instead of it being just shown, it can be altered before being displayed, but it's still the underlying text still the same, it's just displayed differently. So things can be hidden or things can be shown differently, and we'll make use of this in a second. So after enabling this, we do get some additional syntax highlighting. The most noticeable will be in equations. So this relates to both syntax highlighting and concealing. Let's make a new LaTeX equation here and just type, for example, alpha. And you notice if I move out of this line, it turns into the actual alpha symbol. Let's make it a bit bigger here. Okay. And this is because in the text conceal options, we have enabled G for Greek letters and also M for math symbols. So things like greater or equal or beta would also turn into the correct representation. Now there's more things we can conceal, but I have disabled them by default because I think, and this is a very personal thing, it is quite a jarring experience if you first open a file and everything moves around and you can't really rely on where your cursor is anymore, because it depends on if you're on the same line or not. However, we can conceal more. But for this, we need to look a little bit into where these concealing things come from. Some come from the syntax highlighting provided by Vim Pandoc, which designates everything between these $signs as LaTeX, and then the LaTeX syntax highlighting kicks in, which is also from the Vim syntax, and this does some concealing. And some additional highlighting. If it's not concealed, you see it's highlighted as alpha, which previously would not be the case if we disabled this additional Vim syntax highlighting. But the tree sitter highlighting can also do some concealing, and by default it does. I used to just not have the conceal level enabled. I used to have it at 0 because I didn't like it. But now I resolved to more fine-grained control, and this is if we look into how tree sitter works. Tree sitter comes with a bunch of queries which define how the syntax highlighting works. So for example, there's highlights for Markdown, and if we have our own queries folder, this will override the default Markdown queries. So this originally comes from the Markdown grammar and then from the neovim tree sitter plugin. Same for the inline. Here is the link to the original file. And I just copied this file and pasted it in here because I wanted to override some things. And specifically what I overwrote is I commented out these concealing things. And you can, if you want, just go in here in the configuration and enable these again. For example, we see here a text that is meant to be bold, one that is italics, and one that is code. And we can tell it to conceal delimiters. So if we enable this here, we can close it here, open it again, and now you see that hello is actually not showing the markers for bold and italics and all that around it. It's just being highlighted differently. But if we go on the same line, it's being shown again. So this is something you can enable as an example. The same goes for links and images. I'm not going to go through the full list. You can check it out in the highlights thing. Another example of overwriting queries. When we have something in here, it overwrites it. But if we have something in the after folder and then queries, we can get some new queries, for example, for R. And now at the top of the file, we say extends. And now we can extend the query for R. And here I added an extension to highlight something differently. And what I'm highlighting differently is, well, this is a normal code comment. And up here, well, this is the special quarto code chunk option comment. So I decided to just give it a different highlighting style. So you can, well, change this to whatever you want. I believe we could change this to text dot emphasis maybe. And now it would look differently. It does get both highlighting. So it gets the highlighting from being a comment, which is why it's italics. But then on top, it gets the emphasis as well, right? But I kind of like this like green look in the literal text literal sense. All right, this allows us to more easily see our code chunk options. Speaking of code chunks, there's another feature in quarto neovim. Go here. And this is, we can have different types of code chunks, right? You can have an R chunk, a Python chunk, whatever. But in Markdown, you can also have code chunks like this. And these also get syntax highlighted correctly. But if we render this out for quarto, well, it's tiny in here. Quarto has these types of code chunks with the curly braces, which get executed at runtime. But also just regular Markdown code chunks, and they don't get executed. So you might want to decide that in these curly code chunks, you want code completion and all that nice stuff. And hovering, right? Whereas in these ones, you don't want it. And this you can now, well, this is now enabled by default. If you want to change it, you can do so. By default, all code chunks are only get code completion and the language features if they have these curly braces. Otherwise, they don't. If you change this to all, let's see if it works now. Now we should get code completion in here as well. Yes, this does work. Let's change it back. All right. And I also wanted to give you a little glimpse of the future. This is something that is highly experimental and also not written by me, so I don't have that much control or even knowledge of this. But there is this plugin called hologram.neovim. And this currently uses the feature of the Kitty terminal, which I'm in right now, to be able to display images straight in your terminal. And I think this is quite exciting because it means we can display images in our Markdown, but also we can get to this point where we can execute code in our Markdown and display the result straight in our quarto document in neovim, which would be really, really cool. Right now, this still is a bit buggy, but I still wanted to look into how it could work. So let's enable this here. We enable hologram. And now we need some image. I believe I have this cat image from the first episode or second episode in here. So we enable this hologram now. I did add the link, but I didn't enable it in the configuration for that is online there. So we just add the require function. And let's open it again. And now it automatically previews this image right in our terminal, which I think is really cool. There's something off about the line that goes on because, well, it doesn't show our actual image anymore. And it's the same reason I'm not a big fan of concealing things because it makes navigating hard. But just that this is possible, I think is really, really cool. So I'm excited to see where this goes next. So stay tuned and I'll see you in the next one.